on a podcast called Dub Jellison Podcast.
Hey, you know how it is, Dub. Hey,
when I was like, this is kind of real, like holy shit.
Hey, all right, I was one of the chosen ones. Like that's a career night. Like,
never have you failed if you played it right. And I'm just blessed to.
thought it was my time to
shine. I don't remember that. That's crazy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 175 of Dub Jellison Podcast. After a long hiatus, we're finally back, and today we have a very special guest, a man who needs no introduction. If you're a fan of Indiana or from the Indy area, Mr. Kent Sterling. Kent, how are you?
Good, Dub. How you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal, man. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. Like I said before we hopped on here, I've been a fan of your work for a long time, growing up in the Indy area. So it's a pleasure to talk to you finally.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
So, of course, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start with the Colts loss on Monday Night Football last night.
Yeah.
Obviously, the season has been what it's been, but last night it felt like the fan base was finally like, okay, it's wraps now. What were your takeaways from that loss?
One thing is that I thought that they were terrible and lifeless in the first half. And then halftime came, and I thought, you know what? Here's what's got to happen. It can't be Saturday to go in there and dump over tables and stuff. It's got to be a player. And so Zaire Franklin wound up being the guy who did it. And for a quarter, you kind of saw what this team could be. And then they regressed to the mean. Emotion's only going to carry you so far. And Saturday said that emotion's going to carry you maybe a half, a quarter. And then it wanes. And it did last night. And this team, I think, this team's broken. And I think the genesis of that came during the Hard Knocks last year when they were on HBO. And I think it caused a schism on this roster. And they just haven't recovered from it.
Now, why do you say that? That's interesting.
I think that some guys got play and other guys didn't get play, and some guys got branded and other guys didn't. And I think it left a mark. I think that it caused some kind of rift between a couple of factions on that team, if not more of them. And the one group that I think was kind of unscathed was the defensive line. The defensive line's a cool group. In the locker room, they're always together. They're always friendly. They're always laughing. Other groups, not really like that. They're always kind of, those cliques on teams in the locker room. But in the Colts case, kind of the one you like being around, the one that you gravitate toward is the defensive line. And as the Colts kind of look toward maybe a rebuild, that's sort of where I'd hang my hat. I'd say we got our D-line. Those guys are cool with each other. Let's blow up something else.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of speaks to the leader of that D-line in DeForest Buckner. He seems like a guy that's come in from the get-go since he got traded from San Francisco and really picked up the slack, not only in play, but in leadership as well. Is that something that you've noticed?
He is. You got 7 guys with C's on their chest in that locker room. That's a lot of captains. You need some followers too. And DeForest, good leader. I think that Grover Stewart's a good leader too. And they've got guys, like Ngakwe's kind of an outlier sort of, and then Kwity Paye and Dio Odangbo. And you've got guys who are willing followers of Stewart and Buckner. And I think that's the way it works best. Frank Reich always said, and this is one of the things that always griped me about Frank Reich, is he was like, we got nothing but leaders in that room. Well, if you got nothing but leaders in a room, you got a real problem, because if you got leaders, you better have followers. Leaders are defined by the followers that they gather. And if all you got is leaders, that means you got no followers, and everybody's a captain. And if everybody's a captain, nobody's a captain.
I had not thought about that, but that's such a great point. That is such a great point. And that's something that in recent years, I think the media, the fans, whatever, especially, or maybe not this year or even parts of last year, but in the years prior, even when the Colts have struggled, they were like, the media would be like, yeah, that's a strong culture. Guys can go there and succeed. I felt like that was
Yeah.
kind of the narrative, and now it's this.
It's
This is
blowed up.
this is a franchise that people need to stay away from. I mean, you're getting lumped in with the Washington Commanders franchise, who's have 12 different names, who's had 12 different names over the last 3 years. It's like the Colts are in a weird spot right now, and it's something me growing up. I have a big fat head of Peyton Manning right there from when I was little, and unfortunately I can't take it down because it'll mess up my wall. But I mean, having someone like him and Tony Dungy, and I mean, even Irsay was a good owner during those years because he kind of had a hands-off mentality and let Bill Polian construct the roster, and now in the span of a few years they've gone to one of the laughing stocks in the league.
When and this was part of that thing with the Hard Knocks is that was a Jim Irsay deal. Yeah. Chris Ballard didn't want him on Hard Knocks. And so when Irsay overruled Ballard in terms of the Hard Knocks, that caused a problem. And then you've got Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Jim Irsay likes to be one of the guys in the locker room. Mm-hmm. And Carson Wentz never went up to Jim Irsay and said hello, never acknowledged him, none of that. And that really bothered Jim Irsay. And that's one of the reasons that Carson Wentz is gone. Because if you don't want to play for Jim Irsay, you don't want to play for the Colts. And that became a problem. And so you've got Irsay contradicting or overruling Ballard. Then you've got Irsay doing it again with Wentz after he does it with Hard Knocks. Mm-hmm. They go ahead and get Matt Ryan, and nobody wants to take Matt Ryan down, but Irsay does. So all of a sudden Ellinger's playing, and you've got guys like Frank Reich and Chris Ballard and Marcus Brady who are miserable as a result of what they perceive to be Jim Irsay's interference. So there's a lack of trust within that front office between the front office and the owner and the front office. And that's critical. You got to have everybody singing from the same hymnal. You got to have a GM who believes in the owner, an owner who believes in the GM, a GM who believes in the coach, and vice versa. And if you don't have that dynamic, you really got a problem. And the Colts have got that problem.
I always felt like Ballard and Reich kind of were on the same wavelength, and we're a good pair for the most part, at least in terms of what they wanted to do with the roster and things like that.
At least publicly they were.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. I mean, you're going to have disagreements, and people are going to pound their fist on the table and whatnot, and that's fine, as long as when you leave the room, everybody's singing from the same hymnal, and I think both those guys did. Frank Reich understood who he worked for, and Chris Ballard understood who he worked for, and it all kind of worked as long as there was some success. But coaches have said it forever. There is no coach who can survive a 3-game losing streak. A 3-game losing streak will get your ass fired, and it got Frank Reich's ass fired by Jim Irsay, not necessarily Chris Ballard. And you could see that in the press conference where they announced Jeff Saturday as a coach. Chris Ballard was like a POW in that meeting. It was awful. It really uncomfortable. One of the weirdest media availabilities ever, and to be in that room was just surreal. But you know what? It is what it is. You got Saturday, and at the end of the year, Ballard's likely going to go either by his own hand or Ballard's or Irsay's. And, off you go looking for another GM again, just 5 years, 6 years after you got rid of Grigson and replaced him with Ballard.
Now, what that press conference, I watched it live and I was like, what the hell is going on? What did you think when Irsay started talking about making sausages?
Well, it's you set the bar at a certain place. And it's not low and it's not high. It's kind of askew. It's sort of like this diagonal and crooked bar for Jim Irsay, because that at some points what he's trying to communicate is not going to be in sync with what you infer he's trying to communicate. Yeah. Like there's a chasm between the listeners and the speaker with Jim Irsay once in a while. And that's going to happen. And you just need to kind of wade through those murky waters to get to the logic that's at the root of Jim Irsay's message. But, what it did, it reminded me of that night. What was that, back in after the 2015 season, where Irsay and Pagano and Grigson got up, and Irsay joined them at the hip, he said. And Grigson had that same look on his face that Ballard had. And Pagano, I think, thought, hey, I got myself a job at least for another year, so I'm a big winner in this deal. And that's kind of what it was like that night. Ballard was the hostage in that meeting. Irsay was, the conquering hero, bringing in a guy who had never coached beyond the high school level. And Jeff Saturday was trying to explain what the hell he was doing there. It was just so odd. And I there was a lot. I'm looking around the room in my head at, there were chairs over here, there were chairs over here. And it was almost like a pageant of some kind. But I wasn't sure what the hell we were doing, because what were we celebrating? Mm-hmm. One guy got fired, replaced by another guy who had no business being his replacement. And then a GM who was, ready to spit nails. It was just really, really weird at a level we don't normally see.
And like you touched on earlier, I think there's a lot of tension between Ballard and Irsay now, with the Wentz. Oh, yeah. With the Wentz situation, with the Hard Knocks situation now, with the Saturday situation, because I think Ballard said in that press conference that he was pretty much against it. He pretty much came out and said that. And now I know Irsay had never fired a head coach in the middle of the year, and I probably have to say that I think the same of a general manager. I think general managers are harder to fire throughout the year, but I think Ballard's gone at the end of this season. I don't see there's any way that he can right the ship or anything the Colts do from now going forward. I still don't think that'll save his job.
Well, from pure logic perspective, if you build a house and you have an architect design a house, and then you move in and after a couple of years, you really don't like the house, are you going to call in the original architect to redesign your house? You're not. You're going to call a new guy or a new woman who's going to put a fresh pair of eyes on the challenges that you bring to, the design of your house, to belabor this metaphor further. And that's what Jim Irsay is going to do. He doesn't like this. He doesn't like losing like this. And I think he looks at the construct of the roster and he sees a roster that's entirely flawed, with giant holes at left tackle and quarterback, two spots that Chris Ballard thought that he was going to have a really good player there for a long time. So he didn't build around it. Then Costanzo retires, Luck retires, and yet not in that order. And you got a real problem. And so they've kind of fished around trying to find a left tackle. They've tried to find quarterbacks. They've been unsuccessful at both spots. And so you wind up with two huge holes that are very, very difficult to fill, almost impossible to fill via free agency. And so you've got to go get them done during via the draft. But to fill the quarterback, you gave away a first rounder. And this coming year, you got one first. How are you going to plug those two holes at once if you're Chris Ballard? And you have shown a complete inability to plug either hole as those vacancies have existed. If I'm Jim Irsay, and I'm not, but if I am, Ballard's got to go. I need a fresh pair of eyes, somebody who can go out and do this. But there isn't a Bill Polian out there. That's a tough thing. He hired Polian after the 97. Bill Tobin was a bit of a mess. So he gets Polian, and Polian inherited Marvin Harrison from the 96 draft, Tarek Glenn from the 97 draft, had the number 1 overall pick. It's kind of like everything fell into place for Bill. Nothing's fallen into place right now for whoever comes next, or Chris Ballard, whichever Jim Irsay decides.
Yeah, the Colts are just in that purgatory type state where like the Dolphins were for a long time, getting like 6 to 8 wins every year. You need to either tank all the way and get a Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, or you need to go all in.
But those are two really specific, successful instances of that happening.
Yeah.
And if you look back to 2010, I think there have been 14 quarterbacks taken in the first 3 slots in the draft. And how many of them have really turned into something good? Very, very few. 10 of them you can write off as complete disasters.
No doubt. And I think my issue with Ballard, and I started realizing this in the middle of the year last year, was he has just an outdated mindset of what it takes to build a championship roster. I think he looked at the Ravens in 2012, I believe it was. Phenomenal defense. They had Joe Flacco, who ended up stepping up in the playoffs, or like a Peyton Manning on the Broncos his last year, where the defense just carried them throughout the year. And I just think that's an outdated version. I mean, you look at the quarterbacks around the league now: Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert is an up and coming guy. I mean, we can go up and down the list of quarterbacks now, but you need a guy at that quarterback spot. And getting Phillip Rivers, who was 40, Carson Wentz, who was basically broken when he left Philly, and then Matt Ryan, who I thought he would be I thought he would have a similar year to maybe Phillip Rivers, but he hasn't worked out either. It's just they have to hit a hard reset moving forward, in my opinion.
And you need weapons.
Yeah.
If you want to rebuild, you get a guy like Joe Burrow, and you surround Joe Burrow with like Boyd and Chase and Higgins, and you got a dynamic offense. If you've got Burrow and some just ordinary receivers, you don't really have so much. But if you've got a quarterback who can deliver the football to dynamic weapons, you got a chance to win. The Colts are built like, the 1988 Washington Redskins, and you can't win doing that in 2022. You're right.
I mean, you see what the Dolphins, what they've done. Two was not going to be in the same class in terms of skill and all those things as like a Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, but they surrounded him with a hell of a lot of weapons, put him in a really good scheme, put him in a position to win and succeed, and now look what's happening.
When you go out and get a guy like Tyreek Hill, all of a sudden your quarterback gets a whole lot better, doesn't he?
Yeah.
If you had Tyreek Hill here, that'd be interesting with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan can't throw the ball more than 30 yards anymore. You don't need to at Tyreek Hill. You throw it underneath and he runs to the end zone. That works. But guys like Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce, if you got guys like that, Paris Campbell to a lesser extent, because Paris, you can get open in space and have him get some yak. They got 2 guys really in Pittman Jr. and Pierce that you can't utilize like half of their tool set because you got a guy who can't deliver him the football.
And I think with Wentz last year, Michael Pittman Jr. was phenomenal. I think he was climbing that rank to becoming a top 15, top 10 wide receiver in the league. Obviously, you look around the league and wide receivers, there's an abundance of them, like Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams. That's another team that the Packers traded away Devontae Adams, and now you see where they're at with Aaron Rodgers. I know there's a whole bunch of different scenarios and things that go into that, but the Packers and the Colts, I mean, it's a weird time in Indy.
Really weird time in Indy, and it's only going to get weirder. This is like people, because I do the videos on YouTube twice a day. People are like, man, that's got to be hard to come up with things to talk about twice a day about the same team, because these are primarily about the Colts, a little bit Indiana basketball, some Pacers. But I'm like, this is the weirdest season ever. I hope this season never ends. I don't care if they go like 4 in a million. This is awesome.
Great for business.
Every single day is another drama, and drama plays. And I like talking about it. People like watching it. And, I got no problem with the way this season is unfolded. I wish there were more wins because I'm a fan too. Yeah. I want the Colts to win. These guys, and I don't think you're one of these either. that dispassionately report about teams. I think to cover sports, you got to be passionate as hell about it. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, I don't want to consume your product. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Myself, other people that cover Purdue or Indiana or the Colts or whoever you're covering, a lot of us are fans of that team first.
Yeah.
90% of the people that cover Purdue that I've interacted with went to Purdue. They are Purdue fans. Whether they're going to say it on Twitter or whatever or not, they're Purdue fans. I think you have to embrace that. And there's a fine line between going overboard with it, but you still need to have that passion. You have to have that passion when you're talking about the team that you're covering, or people are just going to be like, okay, well, this is like reading I don't want to say the newspaper, but like reading those ESPN like game box reports or whatever. Like there's no substance to it.
Right. And you know what? I'm going to mention a name, and it sounds like I'm dogging him out, but I'm not, because he does a great job of covering things in the state of Indiana for the Associated Press. And that's Mike Merritt. And Mike does a wonderful job of that. That's where we get that with Associated Press. The Associated Press should be journalistically right down the middle. But if you're on TV, if you write a column, if you cover the team professionally, if you're not a fan, I mean, why would you do this? There's not a whole ton of money in it. If you don't love it, what is it all about for you? I don't understand people who get into this without that level of commitment to covering a city or a team. And if you have to move city to city, you have to move city to city. And you adopt, like I moved from Chicago to Indy. That doesn't make me any less a Colts fan. That was in 1993. I'm no less a Colts fan because I grew up in Chicago, watching the 85 Bears. I love it here. I love the teams here. I love the people who run the teams, and I root for them. And I don't apologize for that to anybody.
Mm-hmm. It's also great for business. When teams are winning, people want to watch your stuff, read your stuff, whatever you're putting out. People want to read it. And
there's a connectivity, there's an emotional connectivity.
Yeah. When
you bring emotion to your product and people have an emotion for the product, there's automatically a synergy there that's really, really compelling. And we're just lucky that, like, I went to Indiana University. I spent 6 years on that campus. I love Indiana, and to watch them play basketball this year has been really fun. I'm a fan from afar of Purdue. I like watching Matt Painter's teams play. They play basketball the right way. But when Purdue comes down to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, to hell with Purdue. I want nothing to do with the Boilermakers. Get out of here. Get out of my house. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. And you've got to have that. Rivalries are a part of that. That doesn't mean that I don't really have great respect for Matt Painter. I love talking basketball with Matt Painter. Matt Painter is one of the nicest all-time guys. Jeff Brom, really, really good guy. I like everybody up there. But Indiana's my heart. You know what I mean? So when Indiana and Purdue play, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I'd have to say I'm the same as well. When I was growing up, though, like even in high school and early in my college careers, I was saying not nasty stuff about IU, but like I'd rip on them and things like that, like a normal fan does. But now, since I've kind of grown up a little bit more, I have a lot of respect for all the people down in Bloomington. I just think,
look, you're full of shit. You know that. I don't know if we're supposed to swear on this show, but
you can say whatever.
No respect for Scott Dolson and no respect for Tom Allen at all. Indiana fans don't have a lot of respect for Tom Allen, for God's sake. You can't tell me that from up in West Lafayette covering the Boilermakers that you have a ton of respect for Tom Allen. Don't tell me that.
I think
I'm trying to get you in trouble.
My biggest issue is the fans. I mean, if you're just watching the teams, it's like whatever. But like when a fan starts chirping you on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, that's where the rivalries really get heated.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So like I don't really pay attention to IU fans. Most of them are kind of irrelevant to me in my in my line of work, I guess. But I don't hate Indiana like I did in previous years, I'd say.
Right. And you know what? I think a healthy level of detached respect is entirely appropriate. There's nothing wrong with that, but there is, like, we talk about the emotions that surround Indiana basketball or Purdue football or Purdue basketball, and we'll just leave IU football out of it for the time being because it's a different kind of a different kettle of fish. But part of that is the rivalry. And if you cover Ohio State, you look to your neighbor in the north and you have disdain. And the people up in Michigan, they look to the south and they're not digging the people on WBNS radio down in Columbus either. So, yeah, and that's part of the fun of it. As long as we don't take it too far, as long as we don't go, completely insane, I think it's a really good thing for sports. I think it's good for journalism, and I think it brings a connectivity between the people who provide the content and the people who consume it.
Now, you've been in the game for a long time. How has that kind of changed since you first got into sports media and media in general?
Especially in electronic media, it's changed fundamentally. Because what it used to be, and I remember working with a guy who's got deep Purdue roots, a guy named Jim Barber. He worked for us at WIBC, and he was a sports guy for Dave the King Wilson. And Dave tried to bring some personality out of Jim, and Jim didn't like it. Jim was really, really proud of being a professional presenter of 2.5-minute sports reports. And the evolution of electronic media kind of made that meaningless. Those sports reports, they just don't exist in the same form anymore. And you've got to bring more than that to what you do. You've got to say things that are sticky, things that are clickable. That's sort of the game where management's concerned. And that's what's really changed, is that management evaluates work based upon a different set of criteria than existed like in the 90s or the early 2000s. With the advent of social media has changed everything, really. And so instead of the professional presenters, now you've got kind of lunatics that scream about stuff, and somewhere in between you find some logic and something that's worth watching and listening to, I hope.
Yeah, there's especially Purdue and Indiana fans. I mean, there's people that are kind of like, all right, I'm going to be professional. And then you got, I'm not going to name names, but Twitter accounts that just go wild. And those I have to block and mute, because I'm just like, okay, I'm not dealing with this right now.
Well, people who generate content specifically to inflame and think that by doing that, they gain ground somehow in some kind of professional scorecard, they're wrong. If you can't trust the information you're being presented, Skip Bayless drives me crazy, because Skip Bayless doesn't believe a word that he says, and yet people continue to listen to what he says and read what he writes. And that's always been Skip Bayless, and he's unapologetic about it. He can argue either side of a story and has no real true north. Then you get a guy like Bob Kravitz, who used to work for the Indianapolis Star. Now he's with The Athletic. I hired him at 1070 The Fan when we launched the station to co-host with Eddie White, because he's got a true north. And if you're on every day, you have to have a true north. You have to have something that people are going to come back for, and something that people can trust. And if there's no trust between the audience and the talent, you got nothing. Your whole brand is built on a house of cards, and somehow Skip Bayless has made a good living out of it, a really good living out of it. But I don't understand those who willingly and enthusiastically consume that product.
The people that consume it, I don't really get.
Why?
I know why Skip and someone like Stephen A. Smith do it, though, because Stephen A. Smith's getting $10 million a year from ESPN, and I don't know if I'd say Stephen A. is to the same level as Skip, but they're right there with each other.
Yeah, I think Steven actually does feel things from time to time and does have like it's not always there and it's not always apparent, but he does have a center and he does have a genuineness to his belief system in some areas where Skip is completely, averse to any kind of polarity toward anything. And that bothers me. And it bothers me that people look at that and they say, well, these guys make all the money, so I want to be that. To emulate what those guys do, I think corrupts the process and really takes sports media or any level of media, because it happens in the news too, down a really dark road, and it's not a good place to be.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I mean, we don't need to get into all the all the news stations that are aside from sports media, but I mean, all those have kind of adopted that same mindset as well. But I have listened to some of the stuff Stephen A puts out and some of the podcasts he goes on with like he went on JJ Redick's show. And you hear his thought process and how he goes through things. And it all makes sense, because he was talking about how he believes everything he says and he tries to be authentic. But then when he gets on First Take, he's got to step it up a little bit to create ads and whatever. And I mean, hats off to him. He's making a good living. But I do agree. It kind of sets a bad precedent for people my age trying to get into the game. That they think
noise is the point, and it's not about noise. You got to be smart, and you've got to be judicious, and you've got to build trust. That brand, the brand that you advance, has got to be built on a foundation of trust, or it's going to completely fall apart.
And I know we're short on time here. I just wanted to talk to you about one last thing: the state of sports in Indiana, especially college basketball right now. Purdue and Indiana both in the top 10. How special is that for someone who's been covering IU and covering Purdue for a very long time? And I mean, how special will a top 5 matchup between IU and Purdue in Assembly Hall and Mackey Arena be?
That'd be phenomenal. And today down at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, talking about something phenomenal, Bob Knight was at practice. Bob Knight, we all know his health isn't great, but I've used the word foundation a bunch as we've talked, Dub. And Bob Knight and Gene Cady are Indiana and Purdue basketball, and that both are still around and both are still able on some level to enjoy this rivalry. And we can see those guys and see what it was like back in the day when those two guys and those two programs hated each other. Players hated each other, coaches hated each other, fans did, everybody did. It was phenomenal. And I think we're a little bit more genteel than that now, and I think it's a good thing ultimately. But to see Mike Woodson bring Indiana back and to see Purdue do what they did over the weekend in Oregon at the Phil Knight deal, that was just awesome. And it makes me think, okay, how in the hell will Trace Jackson Davis or Race Thompson stop Zach Edey? And why in the hell didn't anybody else recruit this kid out of Westfield, for God's sake? He had an offer to Montana?
Something like that. Crazy.
And an offer to Purdue. And Britton Smith has been awesome. And, you've got guys who are comparing him to Scott Skiles. And Scott Skiles should have been a Boilermaker, would have been an unbelievable, perfect Boilermaker guy. Just, hard-nosed and the perfect Katie point guard. But to be able to think about those matchups, even a couple of months in advance of the game, I think it's just cool as hell. And I can't wait till tomorrow night, watching Purdue play. And then on the tail end of that, watching Indiana take on North Carolina at Simon Scott Assembly Hall is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch that game. I know Florida State's 1-6 now. The last I checked, so
which is so weird because Leonard Hamilton is a great coach. What the hell happened to Florida State?
I think they got screwed by injuries and then a couple of NIL type / NCAA violation type things. I'll have to read into it more. I'm not totally familiar with their situation, but yeah, I think guys like Leonard Hamilton, Tony Bennett, Jay Wright, who's obviously moved on from Villanova, Matt Painter, those are the guys that they're not gonna have the resumes of the Coach K or Roy Williams or Bobby Knight, but I mean, those are the guys that run college basketball year in and year out. You know exactly what you're going to get from them. So, as a Purdue fan, I mean, Purdue's gone down there and played Florida State a lot over the last handful of years in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. So, I've had a lot of respect for Leonard Hamilton.
Very, very similar programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
always good, never great, no championships.
Mm-hmm. I knew you were going to pull that one. I will say I am excited to watch Indiana and North Carolina. I haven't had too many chances to watch IU this year, but that's going to be a hell of a game and a big test.
Good. I mean, they can go 10 deep, and Indiana's going to get out and try to run. And if they can run, they can bury it. You know, and I think this is a game I think that'll be played in the 80s, if not the 90s. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Maybe Indiana tries to slow it down, but Indiana's backcourt, very athletic, very long, and we'll see what happens tomorrow night. UNC, I'm guessing, is going to be motivated based upon, you know, what happened over the weekend, including that 4-OT thriller against Bama.
Yeah, it's going to be a phenomenal game, and I'm kind of sad the Big Ten ACC Challenge is going away because it produces so many fun matchups every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fun, and it's a good gauge of the two best conferences in college basketball. And, you know, I think it's always kind of a source of pride when the Big Ten gets over on the ACC and we can shut Jay Billis up once and for all.
I've been having issues with Jim Boeheim lately. He's been testing my nerve. Oh, my.
Boeheim's old enough that he doesn't give a damn what anybody thinks about him. He's just saying what pops into his head. God bless him.
Yeah, he doesn't. Hey, I mean, he's one of the top 3 leaders in wins in college basketball history, I believe. So,
what happens when you coach at the same school for 94 years?
Yeah. But like I said, man, I'm gonna have to wrap this up. We went a little bit over on time. I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said at the top of this thing, been a fan of yours for a very long time. So it's an honor to finally get to chat with you.
That's very, very nice, Dub. I had a good time. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
You too.